Have you ever wondered what drives the passionate entrepreneurs and interesting people in the hunting, fishing, and outdoor industry? Well, I did, so I set out to meet them. Aldo Leopold said, "There are those who can live without wild things and those who cannot. These are the exclusive interviews with those who cannot." My name is Kasey Mock. In 2008, I turned my passion for wildlife into a career when I launched our hunting firm, Fever Pursuit. Our family of companies has grown and now includes wildlife management and ranch real estate sales. I get to work with some of the best people and top ranches in the country, and I want to share their stories of adventure, failures, and the business principles that have led to their success. This is the Bucks to Business Podcast, presented by Mock Ranches. I'm really excited about our guest for episode number 15 of the podcast, Greg Simons, proprietor and owner of Wildlife Systems Incorporated, which currently operates hunting and wildlife programs on over 800,000 acres of private land in Texas. This company was named Dodge Ram's North American Outfitter of the Year in 2003, and Greg has worked on hunting programs around the world, including South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, New Zealand, Canada, and Mexico. Greg is a past president of the Texas A&M University's Wildlife Society and the immediate past president of the Texas Wildlife Association, current member of the Texas White-tailed Deer Advisory Committee. Greg has spent much of his time with wildlife policy work, helping to craft legislation language, working with members of the state legislature, and providing testimony before House and Senate committees. He's had many articles published in various hunting magazines, including his new column on the enterprise aspects of wildlife entrepreneurship in Land magazine. He's a regular presenter around the country on topics including marketing, risk management, enterprise development, customer service strategies, the hunter's role in conservation, and the North American model of wildlife conservation. This is an information-packed episode that you don't want to miss. If you like what you hear, please take a minute to listen to previous episodes, but give us a review on Facebook and iTunes. We want to hear your feedback. You can suggest future interviews that we should do, but we really want your reviews on iTunes and Facebook. Those really help us out. Without further ado, let's get into episode number 15 of the Bucks Business Podcast with Greg Simons.
Greg Simons, man, thanks for getting on and spending some time with us this afternoon.
My pleasure, Kasey. I appreciate the opportunity.
I know you're a busy guy out in San Angelo and getting ready for the TWA annual event in San Antonio next week and booking hunts and fighting for wildlife rights. You've got a lot of stuff going on and have been for the last 30 years and, man, really established yourself as one of the leaders, I think, in our industry, somebody I certainly look up to. So it's an honor to have you on the show.
I appreciate that. It's been an interesting 30 years, and it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but indeed there's a lot of water that's went underneath the bridge over that time, and it's been a lot of fun in some ways, and of course a lot of work in many other ways.
Well, you're not just a businessman; you're the full-time feeder filler and water trough fixer and feral hog catcher. You get to wear all hats. Evelina Skinner. Chief, that's what, when I asked Greg to be a guest, he said just as long as a full-time Javelina Skinner doesn't interfere with the credibility of the podcast, he's happy to come on. So. No, I appreciate it, man. I really appreciate it. So, I guess I've known you, Greg, for about 5 years, and our good friend Craig Bowen actually introduced us the first time. And Craig was a business partner of mine. You and Craig have done a lot of business over the years with guiding and outfitting. I think he was an intern of yours when he was at A&M. And Craig introduced us through the Texas Wildlife Association. We've stayed in touch and tried to book a hunt occasionally. I don't know how much success I've had sending you clients, but we've tried to do some of that exercise. And I looked up and saw a Facebook post last week that you've got a new column in Land magazine, CoStar's Land magazine. We had a feature in there a couple of months ago, and your new feature is called The Wild Side of Business, the enterprise aspects of wildlife-based recreation taking place on private lands across the country. How fitting when we talk about our podcast mission, which is to talk about entrepreneurship and business in the outdoors. And so, man, I think the two pair nicely, and it's a pleasure to have you on. And tell us, Greg, how you got into the business. So I had lunch with a guy today. Guy's fighting Texas Aggie, class of 2010. Works in outdoor promotions and media and marketing, and sports marketing, sports promotions, and is interested in getting into the outdoor industry, interested in getting into real estate, ranch real estate, some products. They've got a hunting ranch. He's attracted to the hunting business, and that's a common daily conversation. We get cold called. I'm sure you do, and you run an internship program, so.
Sure.
We get cold called almost daily from young men and women and old men and women that are wanting a second career, wanting to get into something that they're passionate about and work in the outdoors. And, the unfortunate thing is our business is no different than any other in that most of them fail. Most of them will go get into the business with stars in their eyes and most of them will fail. And there's some like you that have been in the business for 30 years now that have had huge success and have positioned yourself as a leader in the industry. And that's really what I think we can all learn from is what's different about Wildlife Systems, or maybe it's the people behind it. Maybe it's Greg, but what's different? So tell us about your 30 years in business and how you got into it, what attracted you, and we'll start the conversation that way anyway.
You bet. Yeah, Kasey, really the summary of some fortuitous opportunities that came my way. Really, shortly after I graduated from high school, I was pretty close with my high school principal, a guy named Stephen Fleener, and graduated, and he was like, "Man, what are you going to do? You going to college?" And I hadn't applied for any colleges at that time, but he knew I had a passion for the outdoors, and convinced me to hop in the car with him one day and drive down to College Station. I'd already taken my SAT scores and didn't score high enough to meet the entry standards. So we drove down to College Station and went over to the freshman admittance department, and Mr. Fleener asked if the department head was there, and indeed he was. It was a guy named Gail Wood, and he granted us an opportunity to come in and sit down with them. And they got to visiting, and then they realized they'd went to church together several years earlier at Friendswood, and so they had a real warm, friendly conversation. And then Gail Wood asked me a bunch of questions about why I wanted to go to school down there and what I was wanting to major in, and basically just told me, here's what you need to do. And so I ended up writing a letter of appeal to get into school down there, but after we left that building, we walked over to Nagel Hall, which is where the Wildlife Department's still housed today, although we'll be getting a new home here in a few months in a new building. But and the first person I met in Nagel Hall was Wallace Klusman, who was the department head at the time. And
yeah,
and so had a couple of really opportune circumstances that happened there. Struck up a good relationship with Dr. Klusman, and some 35 years later, I still have a very close relationship and have been doing business with Dr. Klusman now for about 20 years. So that really kind of helped get me on a path of being able to focus on wildlife professionally, and then, had some great breaks along the way while I was in school at A&M and worked on some internships and met some folks and was able to gain some experience while I was in college that was invaluable in terms of allowing me to have a little bit more hands-on experience and having a few more contacts when I graduated than what I would have otherwise. And in my senior year in college, I had written out just a rudimentary business plan that essentially concepted Wildlife Systems on paper, and was able to present that to a a few individuals, one of which ended up putting some money into the business for me to help me get started. And so that's how, how Wildlife Systems was originally kind of brought together and fledged back in 1987 when I graduated from college, was just really through a fortunate turn of events that took place over a period of about 5 years there.
It's been said, I'm curious if you subscribe to this, it's been said that as an entrepreneur, your network is your net worth, at least to some point. I had a conversation with a guy that I coached earlier today, just after lunch, and we were talking about getting started in business. This man's new to real estate, selling ranches particularly. His family owns several ranches across the state. He's got a great network. We're talking about how to extract the value out of that. And so, early on, I think for him, we have to look at his network, his sphere of influence, we would refer to it as, and see where the value's at. And there may not be immediate buyers and sellers in that sphere, in that 200-person sphere. I guess your sphere, you could say, is the people that if you saw them in the grocery store, you'd recognize them and know their name, right? And so they would take a call or open an email, and there may not be immediate value there as far as them buying or selling, but there may be somebody, or booking a hunt in your case, but they know somebody that could. And so you subscribe to that, and if so, tell me how you go about extracting that out. Does that make sense? Question makes sense?
Oh, it makes perfectly good sense. And unfortunately, yes, I subscribe to that whole philosophy that you just laid out. And I say unfortunately for this reason here is, I've invested 30 years of my life into building this business. And unlike some businesses where an entrepreneur or business person accrues some value within their company. They've put in, a big part of their life building their company, and at some point in time, they decide to go ahead and perhaps sell the company and maybe use that sales opportunity as their retirement segue, if you will. In this business, the fragility of value regarding something like selling a business is, I would say, well over 90% based on that network that you were just describing. And you extract one person who is the central feature of that network out of that dynamic, and the complexion, the context of that network is perhaps changed immensely to the extent to where the value of the business is no longer the same. And that at first blush kind of sounds a bit self-centered, or somebody being full of themselves when they perhaps promote themselves as being that central, that important to their business. But the bottom line is, for the sake of this part of the conversation, it is just that those relationships that tie that network together are largely built around a relationship that stems from, in this case, from Greg Simons. And so trying to present a business portfolio to a buyer and them not recognize the fragility and the significance of, if Greg Simons is no longer part of that whole dynamic, what does that mean in terms of the sustainability of the value and the volume, capacity at that point in time? What does that mean in terms of, business viability, moving forward? And a smart business-man, if they're looking at buying a business like this, they're going to recognize that, and that is often going to be a hang-up or a hurdle in terms of trying to sell a business and make that transition, unless there is the owners being retained for a certain period of time to continue to help run the business. And that's not necessarily unique to the hunting business, but it's certainly something that makes a business like this indeed, what you just described, where the net worth is basically commensurate to the network of the business.
Yes.
And in this case,
that's a key fundamental difference. There's a couple of things that you hit on. One is management style. And we've talked before on the podcast, and certainly I'm coached by Gary Keller, and Gary tells us this all the time. There's centralized management, centralized leadership, where you're the key to your business. That's not a bad thing, but you run into ultimately the factors that you just said is the business isn't as liquid. And if Greg goes down or Kasey goes down, how does the business operate without us? And then the second thing is a physical business versus an online business, if you want to call it a digital business, maybe is a better way to put that. But we see today, even in the hunting industry, man, especially out west, where there's tag applications. By west, I mean the western states, not West Texas, but where you've got tag applications and point systems and public and private land to contend with, where I can't just call Wildlife Systems and book a hunt. I've got to now draw a tag and look at preference points, and is that the right unit? Well, there's a tremendous amount of money being made by tech companies trying to fill a void there, provide a resource, a valuable service there. And they're scaling very quickly. And a tech company or a digital company can scale a lot faster and go viral a lot faster than a physical company can. But it's a different company. I think they have to be complemented by the service provider that actually delivers the service. The only way they're successful is if they're actually connecting people with somebody like you. And at some point, I think you and I become vulnerable to them, because we're vulnerable if they get between us and the customer. If we let that company get between us and the customer, all of a sudden we have to react to how they send us the customer and what costs associated with that. So you can take, in real estate terms, you can take Zillow. I don't want to name any hunting company. Well, I don't mind naming them. There's companies like GoHunt.com, if you're familiar with them, online app-based company that would help with your tag applications and then book a hunt. And we've got a booking agency. In the real estate business, you look at companies like Zillow that want to be between us and the buyer-seller. And if we let them get there, we have to then, as the physical service provider, react to the relationship that they have, quote, built with the buyer-seller. And so you hit on a couple of key business principles there, one being the liquidity of a physical business, and the other just being the scalability of a physical business. And neither one of those reflect on it being a bad business. It's just something I think on the front end we have to look at what our goals are for the company, what our strengths are, what our value proposition is. And I think you and I, too, moving into the future, have to always be aware of those things. How do we stay out ahead of that digital platform where we're not dependent on them? You've certainly done a really good job of that with your involvement with Texas Wildlife Association, where you can show mass amounts of people that you care and that you're invested. Your column now in Land Magazine and what you do for other organizations, that's something that a digital platform can't do, because a Zillow can never go replace a personal rapport, a personal relationship that I have with the buyer-seller or that you have with a hunting client. And they can't replace that referral from one of your past clients to a new contact out of state. And you hit on some key points there I think are very important for people to hear as we're talking about business concepts. You mentioned that it's not unique to the hunting industry. It's certainly not. I've got clients that have sold air conditioning companies and insulation companies and securities companies and real estate firms and fencing companies that they've all been, it's a negotiation process, and during the acquisition, they have to stay on for 3 years to ensure that profits stay up, if not have a growth goal, or the pay is different to the seller. because the buyer wants to ensure that what they're getting is a sustainable business that they can then go take and continue to scale and operate on a profitable basis based on those projections if you're not there.
Yeah, no doubt, and we do. We live in an era today where tools and technology are so important, and those tools and technology are changing rapidly relative to the rate of change that we used to see, let's say, 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. But tools and technology will never replace technique. You have to have appropriate technique along with those modern day tools and technology. And when I say technique in this business, I'm talking about what would be the flip side of high tech, and that's high touch. And that is indeed that high touch is what creates the relationship integrity, whether it be with landowners that we work with state agency personnel that we work with hunting clients that we're marketing hunts to, that personal high touch relationship that is required to develop and maintain that network cannot be fully replaced by modern day high tech tools and technology. You have to have that technique, that high touch, to be able to bridge those needed steps along the way to build this kind of business.
I want to take a minute and ask you two serious questions. First, how do you go about selecting a real estate agent? We hire attorneys, accountants, CPAs, and wealth advisors, while buying or selling a piece of land could be the largest financial transaction we ever make. When dealing with an asset of this size, it's important to have the right team. Mock Ranches is a leading team of realtors and land advisors with Keller Williams Realty. We represent goal-oriented buyers and sellers of fine ranches, farms, investment and transitional lands, and recreational properties. By leveraging the latest technology and resources, we're able to put our clients' properties in front of more potential buyers and investors on a global marketing platform, not just local. This is something our competitors don't do. Now for the second question. Who do you know that we should be helping buy or sell a piece of land? No, really. Who do you know? We would love the opportunity to earn the business of your friends, family, and even you. Please contact us at mockranches.com to see how our innovative buyer and seller platforms can help you accomplish your land goals. That's mockranches.com. Land and ranch buyers should work with a professional realtor who understands and can help them navigate the business, tax, and investment aspects of a ranch. One of the most overlooked services in the entire real estate industry is buyer representation. Our team was able to help close large legacy ranches in Texas, Colorado, and Mississippi last month. I want to thank these clients for allowing us to help them here in Texas and outside of the state. No matter where your land goals may take you, we're there to help. Contact us at mockranches.com.
How have you been able to balance outside commitments? And so let's take, for example, your involvement in Texas Wildlife Association, because we joked a little bit about you being chief javelina skinner and feeder filler and water trough fixer. But the reality is that's true. I follow you on Facebook and I see you doing that. But I can imagine being the president of an organization like TWA is a full-time job in itself. And so how do you delegate out and balance that? As an entrepreneur myself, an owner of several companies and managers of others, and time is the most valuable asset I've got. That's when I look today at what I need to budget to be successful, I have to budget my time. Yep. Because I know if I budget and handle my time well, the finances will take care of themselves. So how do you balance that, Greg, at your level? It's spread out as you are. I think I read that you manage hunting on like 800,000 acres of private land across the state. And I can imagine you've got a couple of cameras and feeders to monitor. So how do you manage that time commitment with outside commitments and then running the business also?
I appreciate I appreciate the opportunity to comment on that, because indeed, from a business standpoint, we're busy. We're busy 365. We're not just busy during the hunting season like some people think that we are. Mm-hmm. But and I have a family and 2 kids, and have my own hobbies. But I also, part of my self-fulfillment, part of what really motivates me to do some of the things that I do professionally, and to do some of the things that personally tie a lot of this together is what I do through my volunteer work. So prioritization is what it boils down to, is because once your life becomes so committed and so busy for you to put more on the plate, it's a matter of establishing priorities, and case in point, when I had an opportunity to come onto the officer ladder in Texas Wildlife Association, a little over 8 years ago. At that time, there was a period of years where during the summer I golfed quite a bit. I would golf, generally a couple of days each week for about a 3.5 month period, and that was the time that I golfed, and I didn't golf, really any time outside of that. But I knew that when I was accepting that commitment to be an officer in TWA for 6 years, I had to carve something, off of my plate. And so, my plan was to basically give up golf, which I did. And, my plan was, when I rolled off as an officer, which was 2 years ago, to take the game back up. And I haven't done it because there's various other things that have seemed to have found their way onto my plate too. But it's really just a matter of prioritizing and trying to maintain some perspective on how much time are you going to devote in a given week to business versus family, and versus what hobbies you might have, and indeed, it's a matter of trying to create those silos where you're going to prioritize and maintain some perspective there.
So how do you decide what to prioritize?
From a business standpoint, it's a good question. I think that the busier a person is, they tend to get drawn into their processes pretty tight, and it's sometimes hard to step away at a distance to where they can clearly see where they need to be, devoting their time to best benefit the whole of the business. But that's what it requires, is once you get so busy, I think it's very easy to get put into a position to where being able to step back and see the big picture and prioritize becomes even more difficult. And
they get caught working in the business and not on the business.
Sure, you bet. And something as simple as delegation of responsibility. Well, I'm too busy to delegate because I don't have time to train somebody up on how to do that task. So I just do it myself. That's an example of how people get perhaps too busy and have a difficult time stepping back and being able to prioritize and allow other folks that they've either hired or that they could hire to do some meaningful things that are very integral to the performance of the company, but allows the owner or the manager to see the playing field more clearly and more entirely, and to make good decisions for the benefit of the company and everybody that's part of that company, in an objective fashion that otherwise it's difficult to make those decisions based on that, that kind of information.
We see that as I think the number one limiting factor for business owners and entrepreneurs, even managers of companies that they don't own, is their ability to create systems and then hire efficiently and then lead a team. And so many times we get caught up in the line that you just said. Nobody else can do that. Only I can do it. It has to be done right, and only I can do it. And that's the number one lie we tell ourselves, I think. And all that means is you haven't created a company, you've created a job. And you've created a job that only you can do because you haven't built systems around anything. And I remember when I first set out to hire an assistant, and there's nothing gives your life freedom than a really great partner in an assistant. And I don't mean a secretary. I don't mean an admin. I mean a great assistant executive. And nothing will bring freedom to your life if you use them right and treat them right and have the right platform. Nothing, I think, brings freedom to your life like that does. And we coach that that's your first key hire. Before you go hire a hunter, in our world, that's a salesman. Before you go hire a salesman, or before you go hire a lead guide or a manager, you hire great assistants. But I remember when I first set out to hire one, I started interviewing, and we had room in the budget and got approval to hire. And I set out interviewing, and I had this aha one day because I ran across a great candidate, and I thought about taking this candidate to the next level. What the heck would I have them do if they started tomorrow? Because I didn't have anything. I didn't have any systems or models around anything. I didn't have an operations manual. I didn't have passwords and steps to do the things that I needed done written down. And I was already working 60-plus hours a week, and so it's not like I could dedicate 10 or 12 more hours a day, 10 or 12 more hours a week even, to train this person. But I'm going to be paying them salary, and I'm not going to be using them efficiently. And so I had a big aha, and I went back to my coaches, and I said, all right, I'm going to make a hire. I'm lead generating for this talent every day, and I'm looking over interview packets and resumes, and I've got a couple candidates, but I realized I don't have a system or a model down for them to go execute. So we worked on that, and I scaled back. Instead of making an inefficient, poor hire, I scaled back and said, okay, let's refocus on the model. Let's spend every available time I've got now, and even bring in interns to help do it, document the systems of the business. That way we can go hire somebody. And one, you're paying them to do something that's worthwhile. And two, they feel valued because if you don't have those important things documented, they don't feel like a great assistant or a great salesperson or manager, or even when you replace yourself with the next CEO of Wildlife Systems, that person won't feel valuable if they're not doing work to their full potential. They're not getting used because we haven't documented systems. And I see entrepreneurs failing a lot there, and that really limits them and limits their ability to go to the next level.
Yeah, and indeed, and I think that is one of the more difficult crossroads to get past for an entrepreneur that's fairly new, that's trying to grow their business and trying to do so much themselves. They eventually reach a point to where they begin to get bogged down. But psychologically, I think that there's few things in the business world psychologically that are more liberating and more that create more psychological independence than just the moment when you realize that with the right systems in place and with the right trust in folks that are competent and capable, that there's lots of people out there that are very capable of doing the same things, maybe better than what you've been doing for the last several years. And
absolutely,
for 15 years,
better is the word. Better is the word. People like you and I, there's things that we don't do very well, and there's things that we do well, and that's the secret to your business. That's why your business has been successful and centered around things that Greg does well. But with that comes other things that we do very poorly. At least in my world, there's things I suck at, man. I do very poorly. And it's not hard to hire somebody for a lot less dollar per hour than what you would bill to go do those things. Yeah,
indeed. For 15 years there, I guided probably about as much as just about anybody in the business in terms of number of, number of days afield, for a period of almost 15 years. And I reached a point to where, I was, I'd lost some of the passion that I had for the business. Was tired much of the time, and still felt like that, I needed to be there in all those camps. I needed to be guiding. I needed to be, helping out in most of those camps that we were running. But the day that I realized that wasn't the case, that there were people that were, more capable than I was of running camps and guiding hunters and taking care of those things, when I could focus on bigger picture things, that's when I really began to enjoy the business again, where I didn't feel like I had to be there all the time, and where I could focus on bigger picture stuff and spend more time with the family and be able to feel like I was rested up much of the time. And but that's just, one example of how I think a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs that are new into the business after several years, if they don't have that kind of moment where they realize that they perhaps are better off to hire some of that stuff out and to place their trust into other folks, they're probably gonna end up burning out and doing something altogether different, if they don't relinquish some of those pressures and some of those duties to other folks, and be able to step back, take a deep breath, enjoy things, and focus on some new ideas.
For every one of us in every business, regardless of what business you're in, from the janitor to the CEO, you could replace yourself. You end up in your guy like Gary Keller, who is the owner and chairman of the board, but doesn't run anything in the world's largest real estate company. He's got a great CEOs and all the way down to great janitors. He doesn't have to do any of it. He works completely on the business for executive vision and how do we influence the industry, and he has a ton of fun doing it. And the business has grown exponentially since he got out of the way and hired a CEO that did it better. So you'd ask yourself the question then, how do I strategically remove myself from every portion of the business based on the value of my time? And so you start with a great assistant, and then you go to mid-level management, sales, and the service arm that's delivering the service, and that's a more intimate touch with the clients. You're having to let go of that. Then you move into the executive C-levels of the company and remove yourself there, and understand the business you have to be willing as an entrepreneur. That route's not for everybody. You have to be willing as an entrepreneur to allow your business to get big enough so that the great people that you want to hire and the people that are up to the standard that you expect. Y'all were at one time, I think 2002, named Dodge Outfitter of the Year across the entire nation, and today recognized as one of the top outfitters in the state of Texas, and Texas, one of the top hunting states in the country. And so you're at the top of the game, and if you're going to allow somebody to come in and replace you in parts of the business, the standard is that they do it as good as Greg or better. And so if you think about that, how does that change, Greg, the way that you approach hiring and training and accountability in your company with your team?
Yeah, we don't have.
I see y'all have training days. You have your guide workshops, and so you run it like a business. You're not all showing up at hunting camp ready for the clients to get there. It's actually run like a business, and it seems to be a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, and that's one of the principles that we've tried to apply since the early days is, treating it like a business, and that one of the peculiar but unique features of this industry is it tends to attract people that get into the business for what I would describe as the wrong reason. They're getting into the hunting business because they think it's going to afford them with more opportunity to hunt themselves and to have fun, as a hunter, and they often ignore some of the basic business principles that should be applied when a business is being, constructed, and when a business is being grown, and when a business is being fine-tuned, is they ignore some of those basic business principles, and a lot of that's not rocket science. There is indeed some business acumen, techniques that you don't just accrue overnight, but it's not rocket science, and that's one of the things that we've tried to really pay attention to from day one, is to approach it as a business. And
give me some examples of those. You said there's some common business principles, basic common business principles. Give me some examples of those.
Basic business plans, just having a business plan that's on paper that you can look at and use as a bit of a compass or template for moving forward. That's just one tool that is a very fundamental tool that should apply to any businesses. Formalized.
How long do you think a business plan should be? How many pages?
I think it depends. For the sake of me, back early on, a half dozen pages or so was plenty. But I was, a pretty simple-minded guy. In many ways, I still am. And so 5-6 pages is as long as it covers, the integral components of a business portfolio, and understanding how to use financial documents, with P&L statements and cash flow, tools, and being able to understand the importance of knowing where you are at any given time, from a cash position, not just where you are today, but where you're going to be 6 months from now, and customer service strategies, another thing that's should be pretty fundamental to most businesses. So being able to understand what that looks like, risk management strategies. We're in a business where liability exposure is very apparent, and there's lots of potential perils in our business that are lurking out there, and you better understand where they are and how to mitigate that, or how to try to mitigate that risk as best you can, because if you don't, it could cost somebody their life real quick. Some of those basic things like those, are components of the
client acquisition and service.
Sure, marketing.
You got client acquisition and service. You've got, I'm just trying to review what I heard you say. Client acquisition and service, you could put those things on a page each if you wanted to. When we look at business plans as far as somebody pitching us a business, or when Gary Keller or Mitch Johnson at Keller Capital, two guys I work closely with, when they look at a business being pitched to them, they want to see a simple one-page business plan. Like, so if somebody, like the gentleman I had lunch with today, that has stars in his eyes about getting into this industry, I think somebody at that point should have a lot of clarity, be able to condense it to one page. So you got a needs analysis, you've got client acquisition and service, and then you've got basically a SWOT assessment, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to that business. And then the last thing, I think, for simplicity purposes, is just a basic pro forma. I remember I didn't have much business training in school at all. My parents were not high-level business people. They were very successful, but not high-level business people. And so when I got into business with a basic ag degree and a background in hunting, much like you did, I was asked to do a pro forma one time, and I thought, what in the hell is that? I don't even know what you're talking about. And just a forecast of where you're going to get the money, what happens when you bring it in, and how much of that's profit. And on a simple business pro forma. And I see the same exact thing that you said. People get into the business for the wrong reasons without like a business, because at the end of the day, the work it requires to be successful in this industry can go make you a lot of money in other industries to fund your hunting habit. Absolutely. Or to fund your fishing habit. And you get into this industry because you're drawn to it and you can't stay out of it and maybe semi-crazy. But you have to treat it intentionally like a business. You have to treat it intentionally like a business. How does that, I'm going to ask one more question, then I want to completely pivot and switch topics. Knowing that, though, Greg, how does that affect how you go hire and train? Like, as you're looking for people in your business, and I'll even ask a personal question, if you have a succession plan, as a sole entrepreneur, sole proprietor, somebody that's central to the business, you can tell that looking from the outside in. Do you make hires? We coach people and say, look, everybody you hire, you need to hire to the future and the highest future position, not just the immediate need. So when you look at your company, do you make hires that way? Do you hire people that you think could move up the ladder? And then what's your strategy? What's your strategy for Greg in the future, if I can ask that question?
Sure. Yeah. In our hiring strategy, it's probably a bit different than in a lot of businesses, because most of our support is part-time and seasonal as opposed to full-time.
Gotcha.
So we just have a few full-time employees, but we have 35 or 40 that work for us part-time and seasonally, and that creates a different employer-employee relationship in itself, and just in terms of the general commitment of a part-time employee that person has to their employer, if they're part-time, is often just going to be a bit different than if they're a full-time employee. And
gotcha.
I won't go into a lot of details associated with that, but just recognizing that in itself is a different environment, working environment, in terms of strategy of not only finding those people but keeping that support staff when they're part-time, as opposed to someone who's 100% of their revenue is from one employer. And but in terms of, if I was just going to characterize what we look for and have for many years, and what we'll continue to look for when we're trying to add to our support, is the personality and character trait of that person. If we feel like they have good attitude, good personality, good character, they can overcome some of the other things that we're going to need them to do. If they have,
those are the unteachables that make a hire risky.
Absolutely. It's just with our business being high touch, where our ability to retain business, whether that business be with our landowners or their hunting clients, those hinge on relationships. And when we're counting on someone that has a sour attitude, it's gonna greatly compromise our ability to cultivate those kind of relationships the way that we need to. So, attitude, kind of character, personality traits, and personality traits. We've got folks that help us that are very extroverted, that do a great job. Mm-hmm. We have folks that help us that are very introverted, that do a great job. So it's kind of hard to, when I say personality traits, to frame that up, under one kind of profile that fits everything. But those are the things that we look for more than how many deer or antelope or elk a person's guided on, during their hunting career, whether or not they can fully cape a head out at the time that they first start helping us, as opposed to just being able to field dress and skin the carcass. Some of those other, details, we can train people up very easily to cross those finish lines just fine. But those other, people skills, it's hard to, it's sometimes hard to shape those as readily as what it is to train people up to do some of these other tasks. So, attitude, and just kind of that character, quality is what's most important to us with the folks that we rely on.
Same here. Good stuff, man. Good stuff. I was going to pivot, and I had a topic in mind, but I'm going to call an audible and ask you one more. When it comes to funding a business venture, that's a lot of people see it getting into business for themselves, starting a new business, be it part-time or full-time, making career change. There's a substantial amount of risk associated with that for any of us. Your financial situation, your marriage status, if you have dependents, your debt to income ratio, all those things come into play when you talk about making a career change or starting a business, launching a business as a part-time basis that you hope can be your dream career one day. So talk to us. You had some seed money when you started Wildlife Systems. I won't ask you the details about that, but any advice you can give on how to fund a startup and then how to fund a hire? I think a lot of entrepreneurs grow a business where to support them and their family, but they can't see hiring a $45,000 or $60,000 assistant. They can't see how to fund that without them taking a $45,000 or $60,000 hit. So talk about financing a business and the growth of a business a little bit, if you will.
Sure, you bet. Yeah, really there's two more common ways that folks that are getting into a new business typically end up putting together some capital or some cash to work with on the front end. And, one of them is through a loan, through a lending institution, mm-hmm. like a bank. That's, very common these days. And, if a person doesn't have a credit history or a portfolio of valuable assets or, some other assets that they can offer to the person that's lending the money as collateral. And sometimes it's hard to put together money that way if they're coming from a pretty modest background. The idea of going out there and being able to secure a $100,000 or a $200,000 business loan is probably not very likely. And mm-hmm. So finding individuals that are willing to invest, which is the route I went, is really the next most common option that people.
Yeah, that's what we want to talk about right there.
And that's not a certainly not a bad option. The one of the downsides for some of those kind of situations is you better be ready to have someone else perhaps meddling in your business if you're going to count on, mm-hmm. Just a silent partner or a partner that maybe is going to be an active partner that comes into the fold and lays out, a chunk of money. They are more inclined than a bank to want to be kind of in the middle of your business. And some folks, might have a more difficult time being able to, feel good about that on a daily basis if somebody is wanting to kind of be in the middle of what's going on. But that's just the way that sometimes works when folks are getting into a new business and have someone else, putting some money into the business. In my case,
some of that meddling or coaching is super valuable, though. You can have,
no doubt.
If you have the right investor, that can be ultra valuable.
Sure.
I've found.
Yeah, no doubt, and that's what I was getting ready to say. Is with the right the right talent from that kind of person, especially if they have a business background, the money that they're putting into the business should be just one of the things that you're trying to utilize that person can provide. Their business acumen and their business experience that maybe provided them with financial stability, is the other thing that a person should be trying to glean from. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it does not. In my case, I had a guy that put a modest amount of money into it, and that was about as much as he wanted to put into it. And so, I early on, whether it was good, bad, or indifference, I learned the importance of knowing how to leverage cash, and that can be a precarious position for a business person when they are kind of betting on the come, and and they spend some money in this case to secure hunting rights on a property and deplete their operating account down to next to nothing, and know that they have lease payments, balance payments coming due later in the year. They better learn how to leverage that opportunity and quickly create cash flow that is part of the essence of leveraging cash is that confidence level of knowing that you can make it work. And for a new business person that's young, that can be a pretty daunting proposition. For me, I don't know if I knew any better. I felt like I could make it work, and indeed I was able to make it work. But looking back, it'd be easy for me to say I was a fool for trying to leverage my.
You may not advise.
The way that I was.
Yeah, you may not advise your kids to go about it and do it the same way.
I absolutely would not.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of creative ways to get financial backing, though, because if somebody's going to back you financially, and they are a business person, they may have business resources and assets that your company needs access to. For instance, administrative support, accounting, the ability to produce marketing content, access to a network and database, legal support in drawing up business documents. There's a lot of ways to fund or support the start of a company outside of just writing a check, where the entrepreneur that's borrowing the money is now on the hook for paying all that back. Because if I'm a business person, if somebody comes to me and says, Kasey, I've got this business. I've got this plan to start a business. Here's a business model that I'm comfortable buying into, and they ask me for $250,000 to fund it. I'm a lot less likely to give them $250,000. I'm not a bank. I'm a lot more likely to give them administrative support and coaching and marketing content and database promotions that can help launch the business in exchange for a like-kind trade. Then if it works, it's been a win-win for both of us. And if it doesn't sink them financially, and we can go our separate ways. And there's a lot of ways. I think people get caught up and intimidated by the financing of a business or financing growth because they think too nearsighted. They think about it's only a loan from a bank or a shark or a venture capitalist who's going to be they're going to act like a shark. They're too fierce, and I don't want to be on the hook for somebody, or I'm adverse to debt. And so I'd encourage people to think creatively about financing and think creatively about your partners, and only go solicit a partner that can bring more than just cash to the table. When it comes to financing growth, go ahead.
Yep. No, good point. Very good stuff.
When it comes to financing growth, I think all of us hit that scene where we look and I hope you have enough time to go through this, Greg, because I think it's good stuff. But we get to a point where we're ready to finance growth in the form of people, and people are, for most of us, the most expensive thing in our budget is personnel, overhead. And you start looking at how you'll finance people, and that takes you back to looking at the value of your time. And the only way I can, in my business, the only way I can replace 4 hours a day or 3 hours a day of administrative work and content production and marketing is if I'm able to take that time and focus that same amount of time on lead generation and client acquisition, because that's the income part of the business. And that's the part that today is more expensive than the other parts, and the part that today only I can do. And so you have to, it's a gritty, tenacious process where we don't hire leverage and then kick back and say, man, thank the Lord I get a little more sleep. If that was the case, you wouldn't be filling feeders anymore. I think it's a process in which we hire leverage and say, okay, now I get to focus my time back on where it's most valuable. So,
hey, Bucks to Business friends. To show our appreciation for you taking your time to listen to the Bucks to Business podcast, we want to give you an opportunity to win a free trophy whitetail hunt with our team at Fever Pursuit's Professional Hunting Services during the 2017 season. It's easy to sign up. All you need to do is pause this episode that you're listening to right now, get out your phone, tablet, or your laptop, and go to mockranches.com and subscribe to our newsletter. Or you can go to mockranches.com/podcast and register there. But it's an easy process. Just subscribe to our newsletter and you get a chance to win a free trophy whitetail hunt during the 2017 season with our team. We very much appreciate you and hope that you win the hunt.
So talk to me about changes that you see coming in the industry and how to position yourself in the future, how we may learn from that.
Right. As far as just pressures, that are inherent to my business, some of them are what you just described. With any of the properties that we're offering hunts on, we go into it recognizing that it's going to be a temporary relationship that we have with the landowner. It may be as temporary as a year. It may be as temporary as 30 years. We have one family that we're working with right now that this next year will be our 30th year to be working with them. So
wow.
They've been with us since, going into our second year of operating the business. But we know that there's going to be a tendency for there to be properties that go a different direction. And there are various things that can create that change. It might be a property selling, like what you just mentioned a while ago. It may be, a group of hunters coming in and offering a pile of money that the landowner just cannot ignore. It may be a landowner that passes the operations of a property down to one of their kids that want to do something different with the property. It may be a result of us doing something that makes that landowner mad, that decides they just don't want to do business with us anymore. So there's a number of different things that can happen that will short circuit our ability to hold on to certain properties as long as we would like to hold on to those. But that's just inherent to the business. And anybody that's operating the business the way that we operate it, with how we work with landowners, they're going to be exposed to those same kind of, pressures that we are. So that's just part of the deal. We accept it, and we try to have strategies to deal with those kinds of possible changes should they happen. But as far as other things that that are shaping the direction of the the industry, you mentioned CWD. For us, CWD really has not impacted any of our day-to-day operations. We field a few questions, people wanting to know about people that have heard of Texas being a CWD positive state now, and is it safe for them to take their deer back home to eat, those kind of things. And there's really not that many questions that we get related to that. So CWD for us has not presented any pressures or influence over our day-to-day business operations. One thing that's certainly changed a lot in the industry, and we built our initial business model largely around whitetail deer. And if you look at our logo, that's going to largely tell you what our focus was, early on. It was whitetail deer, and a lot of what we did, a lot of what we spent money on, a lot of our central focus was around whitetail deer. And at one time we were probably operating about as many commercial whitetail hunts as just about anybody in the business across the country. And if you look at all the different game species around the country, especially big game animals, what's changed the most, across that spectrum is what's going on with whitetail deer. And I've been, pretty outspoken about some of the concerns that I see with what we're doing with whitetail deer these days. And I've had a lot of blowback, and that's okay. I'm a big boy. I know that when a person is outspoken, what it's likely to look like when others feel like their toes are getting stepped on, and that's going to translate into some blowback. And but there's some things that that we've done in recent years with how we're producing these deer that are concerning to me, and there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the broad market strength for hunters that are traveling and going on these whitetail deer hunts is not nearly as strong as what it was as recent as 10 to 12 years ago. And there's multiple reasons for that. But the reason that I recognize that has created that erosion, that incremental erosion, is how we have relied on so much of an artificial platform, a very aggressive artificial platform, to mass produce deer that are bigger every year than they were the year before, and deer that are now of a size that look so much different than they did as recent as 10 or 12 years ago, and how that is affecting deer hunters' perceptions of whitetail deer, and how it's affecting how they value whitetail deer and what they're willing to, spend their money on from one year to the next. There's not near the number of hunters out there today that there were 10 years ago that are spending several $1,000s a year to go on their annual whitetail deer hunt. It's I won't say it's a shell of the market that it once was, but it's significantly reduced. And a lot of it relates to how we are, mass producing these giant deer. In a lot of the hunters' minds, some of the mystery, some of the magic is gone, and whitetail deer hunting just looks different, and it feels different to them today than what it once did, and they're not nearly as compelled to reach in their pocket and spend a big chunk of money to go pursue those animals, annually like they once did. And so, we've rearranged our business model in recent years to accommodate that. If you just look at, if you were to break our revenue into different silos that are attached to different species of game animals, you'll find that we're not nearly as dependent on whitetail deer is what we were 10 years ago. And so we've in some other areas tried to backfill that shortfall, and we've done a pretty good job. We're not doing the total sales. For us, our high water mark was 2008. I don't know if we'll ever do what we did in 2008, and right now that's not a real big priority for me. But whitetail deer and the huge unquenchable appetite that we once had for that big game animal, it's not what it was. Don't know if we'll ever recapture it. And so consequently, relatively large hunting operations that rely on whitetail deer, I don't know that you'll ever see folks doing the scale that some people were doing in the whitetail deer hunting business back during a period of time that led up to 2009, and 2009 was the paradigm. It wasn't 2008, it wasn't 10, it was 2009 that things changed, and I don't know that they'll ever be the same, in the foreseeable future anyhow.
Well, Well, we've had this exact same experience. I started our booking company, Fever Pursuit, in 2008. And our thought was we would be 80% Texas and 20% Western states as needed when our clients wanted us to help source a hunt in New Mexico or Colorado or Wyoming or Old Mexico or wherever it might be. And it's been exact opposite from day one. 2009 was our first good year, and we've been from day one about 80% Western states, 20% Texas. And the first logo that we rolled out was a whitetail deer, and now our logo is a mule deer. And the demand for the Western hunts, the wild imaginable adventure style hunts, is so much higher for us anyway, so much higher than the demand for Texas whitetail hunts, that we've had to focus our markets there. And the thing that's disrupted us, though, is we can't control those Western markets like we could. By control, I guess the right word would be, we can't bet on those Western markets like we can bet on Texas because of tag applications and draw process and the turnover of real estate and winter freezes and different factors out west that we can't control as much as we could project our business here in Texas if it were heavier Texas. But I will say that we have very little demand for high fence deer hunts. Very little. And even a smaller demand. It's not so much high fence, it's the origin of where the deer came from. We have even smaller demand for deer that have come out of a breeding operation. And I'm not anti-breeding operation at all. I don't think you are either. Where I sit on that is I think deer breeding and the ability to capitalize on that, on what is a public resource, and I believe should stay a public resource, that's a privilege, not a right. And if there ever becomes a point where what we're doing to benefit few of us who are able to make a living off of a resource, if what we're doing jeopardizes what is owned by so many more, so where few benefit jeopardizes what's owned by so many more, and it's a public resource, we have to take a step back and say, how is this affecting us in the future? So we've got a smallest demand in our business is for the deer breeding operation type of deer. We see a higher demand for exotics than we do for those hunts. The highest demand would be for the elk and the mule deer out west. But I tell you, in Texas, we can't get our hands on enough free-range whitetail archery hunts. If it's an archery-only ranch, we booked for a great ranch in San Angelo that you probably know of, Thresh Cody's, and they're at Water Valley. And that ranch we're sold out for a year. I mean, as far as we could project, but it's 5,000 acres archery only. Hadn't been a gun fired on it in 10 years. And a hunter can bet on coming and killing a Pope and Young free-range whitetail deer, and there's not that many places to do it. Now, they don't fetch the dollars that a 180-inch deer would fetch somewhere else because the average is not there. But there's a high demand for that that we see in our market. And I guess the unknown factor is how I've got a 3-year-old son that his first word literally was deer. He woke him up in his bed one day and he pointed up to this deer above his bed and he said, "Dad, that deer." And that was literally his first word outside of "Dad, that was deer." My perception of deer hunting when I killed my first buck, which was a 3-point deer on my grandmother's place in San Marcos, 27-acre place in San Marcos that we used to hunt in the Cedar Breaks. I killed a 3-point buck and was as proud of that deer as you can ever imagine.
That was 1 point more than my first buck.
Yeah. And my second buck was a 3.5-year-old when I was 7 or 8 years old. 3.5-year-old 8-point, typical hill country deer, 6-inch tines, 13, 14 inches wide. And I asked my dad, "Dad, can I mount that one?" And so if you killed a 20-inch deer, man, you're strapping that one to the hood and driving through town and telling stories about it. And I don't think my son's perception of deer is going to be the same as mine was. I don't think his curiosity about whitetail deer and his excitement over whitetail deer, because he rides with me in the truck a bunch and we're on the Ranger and we drive by 200-inch deer in the pasture that look at you. I don't think his perception and his excitement and sense of adventure and curiosity about white-tailed deer is going to be the same as what mine was. And I don't like that. That's my biggest concern about the industry.
Yep. No, and that's a valid concern, and it's people being people. We were talking about tools and technologies. People being people, we're going to use what tools and technologies are legally available to us to try to help us reach whatever our goals are in life. And if it's growing big deer, then you can artificially inseminate deer. You can, do embryo transfer. You can sex semen and determine whether or not you want, the fetuses to be males or females. As long as those tools and technologies are legal, people are going to do that. But I think when you line the different deer management practices up, along a proverbial continuum, and there's lots of tools out there these days that are being used. It's a very broad continuum, and I do think that somewhere along the way, and I don't know where it's at, but somewhere along the way, you cross a line where, when we're talking about how we manage wildlife, not how we produce livestock, but how we manage wildlife for hunting purposes, there's somewhere along that continuum that we probably cross a point of diminishing returns. And it's somewhere there. And indeed, I feel like we've reached a point in time where we're crossing those lines on a regular basis these days on how we're producing these giant deer. Not 150-inch deer, but 200, 300, 400, 500-inch deer. Deer up north this last year that was 670-something inches. Deer so big that the frontal bone of their skull cannot support the weight of the antler. So consequently, you have frontal bone fractures and pedicle fractures, and you have production that's outstripping the pace of what natural selection have done for those animals over eons of time. And there's, from a biological, physiological standpoint, there's consequences to that. From a hunting market standpoint, there's consequences to that. And as we have what I would describe as making cubic zirconians out of wildlife diamonds, there are consequences on how that affects the sustainable values of that resource. And that is the resource that has served as our most important conservation funding mechanism in this country for a little over 100 years. And I think that we need to try to do a better job of wrapping our head around what does that mean at the end of the day, not just today, but 20 years from now, 50 years from now, in terms of sustainable conservation funding. And that's what's really at stake. What's at stake is not just my ability, the ability to sell, big 2-year-olds out of the pen. It's our ability to continue to rely on conservation funding that has shaped, the success of wildlife in this country, for our benefit today, and hopefully for, the benefit of future generations as well. And that's what's at stake here. And
exactly right. Today, only about 10% of our population hunts. We know not all 10% of them vote, because we can see the percentages of people that vote. And yet, in a democracy style form of government, where hunting activities do directly, they are the number one source of conservation, wildlife and conservation funding, public lands funding out west. We interviewed backcountry hunters and anglers folks a couple episodes ago. It's a phenomenal interview about how hunting is funding public access out west, and that's where breeding populations of elk and mule deer and pronghorn, it's where the nucleuses of those exist. And there's pushes to privatize public lands and go in and start extracting minerals out of there. And I will tell you, as a capitalist, as a conservative capitalist, and somebody that's extremely pro landowner rights, I think you'd probably be in the same boat. I see both sides of the argument. I see how expensive real estate is today. how expensive business operations are today, and I'm compassionate when landowners tell me they're trying to make that work and they're trying to hold on to ranches or be able to fund the acquisition or fund just the family continuing to allow their family to hold a piece of land when we've got a highway robbery of an estate tax that can take millions of dollars in taxes out of a family trying to inherit a ranch where it's and position them where they can't even pass it down to their kids because they can never pay the tax.
Yeah,
and
no
so I'm
doubt.
compassionate to that.
Sure, and the concerns that I just described, and they're concerns, but at the same time, from my point of view, I don't hold any individual at fault because again,
no, not at all.
They're going to use whatever tools and technologies are available, for them to legally use to try to accomplish whatever goals are affordable to them. So you can't hold people at fault for some things
Absolutely
that I think
not.
have created a problem for, white-tailed deer and our white-tailed deer hunting industry. But at the same time, it's still a very combustible conversation when you have this conversation between folks that are on either side of the room of that debate. It's a very volatile, very, it can turn into a very ugly conversation very quick. And it has in recent years. And it's unfortunate that it's come to that. But that's where we are. And I think that it will continue to be a very divisive conversation because you do have folks that are going to continue to participate in those practices that I just described as concerning, and you have a growing percentage of folks that are going to continue to stand up and say, "Time out. I don't think that's right. I think we need to talk about this," even if it means creating legislation that allows us to step back a bit, and that tends to provoke the conversation even greater in terms of the divisiveness of the discussion. But that's where we are in that in that discussion, and
well, it's important that we all come at it from an angle that we're concerned about. Well, I think it's important that we all come at it trying to approach a win-win for the longevity of what we all enjoy doing and the longevity of the resource. And if we, on either side of that debate, if we can agree on those things, if we can agree that, look, we're trying to do what's best for the resource and best for us as hunters in the future, there's always going to be different opinions. But if we come at it that way, I think that limits the divisiveness and limits the fractures in what is a small hunting community today. It's bigger in Texas than it is nationwide. But long term, you nailed it earlier for me. Long term, if our practices degrade the percentage of the population that hunts, that's going to be directly seen in our access and abilities and rights to hunt. And if we're not recruiting new hunters, because hunting, you've got a quote in your article. I guess we should wrap up, but you've got a quote in your article that says, I guess it was E.O. Wilson, sociobiologist, actually wrote it. Humans are hardwired to want to connect to nature. I think hunting is within all of us. If our ancestors didn't hunt, we wouldn't be here. And so hunting is hardwired in us, and the curiosity about hunting and procuring your own food and being a provider, that's at the core of who we are, I think, as people. I think it's biblical, actually, that we are hunters, and we were hunters certainly before we were gatherers. But if we lose that curiosity and that drive inside us is not renewed into generations in the future, then our ability to hunt is going to be degraded politically, and I think it's a big concern for us moving forward. Private lands, public lands, hunting access, all the above. Mr. Simons, you've been a wealth of information, and I look forward to connecting with you at Texas Wildlife Association next week. We're going to be there I'm going to be there for the Private Land Summit, and then for Friday's activities, the Big Game Awards. I won't be able to stay Saturday. What can I do for you, my friend? You've been awesome. You've taken an hour and a half out of your day to spend with us. What can I do for you?
Help me skin a javelina someday.
All right. I'll do it. Just don't put me on the stinky end of it.
That could be either end.
Yeah. Where can we find information, Greg, about what all y'all are doing? Is it just wildlifesystems.com?
Wildlifesystems.com is the best place to go. Yes, sir.
Okie doke. Well, man, I appreciate you. We'll have to catch up in person and have a drink or something at TWA. I appreciate you, Greg. Take care.
You bet.
We'll see you
have
in a week or so. Thanks, buddy. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow us on iTunes and give us a review. We enjoy reading your reviews, and the ratings help us move up the list. You can also follow us on social media at Instagram or Facebook at Bucks to Business Podcast.